In week 4 of managing and leading, we discussed the reinforcement model. And the reinforcement model, we said, is an external model. The source of the behavior, the driver of the behavior, is the consequences associated with it, which are the reinforcement and punishments associated with the behavior. So this is a very common sense way of thinking about behavior in organizations. We think of people as conforming to reinforcements, of trying to avoid punishments. It's part of our everyday language even to talk about what gets rewarded and punished in organization. And the reinforcement model tries to bring some rigor to that and says, yes, exactly how do those work, what's the strength, and what are the features of how reinforcement and punishments are delivered that makes them impactful versus inconsequential. We talked about the importance of contingency, and this just means that the consequences associated in time with the behavior that the entity receiving the consequence understands that it's associated with the behavior. And so contingency, for instance, is going to be, extremely important in, for instance, if you're training a dog to do something, you can't defer the reward till the next day. They won't be able to associate their behavior with the reward that they're given. Human beings have a better capacity for understanding. We can explain how rewards and awards are related to specific behaviors. We can explain it to people, we can announce it with respect, but nevertheless, contingency actually has an impact. And in business settings, because of the administrative challenges, misspelled, I notice, inherent in linking together rewards with people's behaviors, sometimes it's hard for the administrative system to do that well. And we had some examples in class of people talking about, yeah, I got this award like 6 months later, so it was nice. Kuzma Symposium report, one of these. It was nice, but I didn't, I didn't feel very appreciated by it. It didn't seem very genuine. This idea of contingency is very important for our purposes because we want to understand why informal social rewards are so influential in the workplace. This includes punishments, rewards, so reinforcement and punishment. And social groups definitely use these to police behavior, to reward behavior. And social groups are very good at both the contingency and understanding this notion of what is idiosyncratic for people. So this notion that people like different things, and social system people who know people are able to provide highly contingent, appropriate rewards and have a big impact on people. So one of the big things that we talked about, we saw it in the case for this week, is understanding that organizations don't have very few consequences, they have a lot of them. And the most consequences and the most systematic use of it is actually by the informal organization. The administrative side actually struggles with it, but individual leaders can, be quite good at this. In addition to understanding types of reinforcement, we also talked about the role of scheduling, how these are given over time, and the frequency with respect to of consequences with respect to behavior. So one consequence for every behavior is actually subject to this problem of satiation. It's kind of too much feedback. And so what is the right amount? What is the right delivery of that amount? And certain schedules, like interval schedules, where people are rewarded on a very specific pattern. So usually performance appraisal systems have these patternings of behavior. So they happen on a very fixed schedule. So they're every 6 months or every year. And you can see employee behavior. They anticipate anticipate they're going to be evaluated. It's a consequence for them, and their behavior gets much better for a period of time. And then once they've been evaluated, it drops off, and it's so predictable. It's actually called a performance appraisal effect on behavior. And so where schedules are more unpredictable, um, that so we don't know when we're going to get the consequence, but we believe we are going to get it. It has to appear available to us. Then the behavior is highly persistent. It's got high levels of extinction. And so, for instance, one of the things that comes up when we're looking at performance appraisal systems in an HR class is, why are they so patterned? There's actually no particular reason they've got to be on an interval schedule. Why can't they be, random? And if they're random, people are, going to not anticipate them. And gosh, with modern computers and our capacity to do scheduling, no particular reason we do these things. But there is a reason we do them. It's because of administrative kind of convenience, administrative patterns. And so I hope you're kind of getting this sense, which we've already talked about, of the administrative system tends to be somewhat bad at using reinforcement, whereas the informal system is quite good at it. As we've already mentioned, random scheduling, whether interval or frequency, tends to lead to very robust behaviors that are resistant to extinction. Another part of of scheduling that's important is this notion of stretching, which what we typically do when we're training people is we have a reinforcement schedule, which is pretty frequent, and then we want to stretch it over time, and so much so that maybe the behavior gets just totally internalized and doesn't need anything other than an occasional recognition, kind of pat on the back. And so that's this notion of stretching. And again, it's something that is often done by the informal group quite well. And so when we get into and start talking about socialization, one of the things that we'll see in some of the examples of socialization, the informal group not only is contingent, they're good at the stretching, they're good at another aspect that's not listed here, but we talked about the shaping of behavior, and that administrative systems struggle with that. We certainly talked about, and it's definitely true, that people who are managers and aspire to be good leaders, they can actually do this with great effect. And they can particularly do it with something that doesn't cost a lot of money, which is this recognition and praise. Um, and as we talked about in class, kind of the good news on the scheduling side of this is we have a very hard time doing this because of time demand super systematically. But if we're purposeful about it, we actually kind of end up doing things on a pretty much a variable random schedule. We've got to make sure that it's the appropriate behavior that's getting rewarded. We want to be contingent and notice things when they happen. But scheduling is actually good news for us from this standpoint, because we're time poor. We can't all the time be there nor see everything that happens, but recognition and praise can be highly effective for us. And again, the scheduling kind of works in our favor. Probably not the most important thing, but a very important thing about understanding reinforcement is that it actually is a really good first cut approximation at trying to understand behaviors in the workplace. If the behavior is really happening because of reinforcement and punishments, and we want the behavior to change, and we can change the behavior by changing reinforcement and punishment, that is the easiest solution we're going to find in most instances. This came up in the real good insurance with the absences. Maybe we're going to have an impact by just getting rid of the fairly stupid absence system that they've implemented. That's going to have a change on the pattern of behavior. Now, we might want to do that more strategically so it's not seen as a takeaway, especially if we're going to make some alteration in the pay for performance system. That becomes something that's kind of part of our bargaining with and revision of the program that employees like a lot, is to get rid of a piece that they may not like very much, and we know is absolutely ineffective. But what doing that as an analysis just really gets us at pretty simple solution. We're going to see that simple solutions, when we can use them, of course we'd like to, and we will try to, but not they don't always work. But at least if we understand kind of what the baseline of behavior is, what the reinforcements and punishments are that seem to be driving behavior, that's a really good first cut. And if we see behavior that doesn't conform to reinforcement and punishment, we're going to have to work harder to understand it, and we're going to have to start using models like the model we're going to talk about next week, the social information processing model, which tries to explore and understand how people's perceptions and beliefs impact their behavior. On the further reading, this is a book that was out some time ago, but it's Ken Blanchard and Spencer Johnson, and there basically is a book of you can be a better manager in 1 minute and a day, and it's about how do you, a bunch of tips and ideas about how do you think through and be good at using reinforcement. So how do you encourage people? How do you acknowledge people? How, and I think the phrasing of it, as much as anything, the title really tells us everything that we really need to know here. Is the being purposeful in this is not to consume all of your time and capacity. In fact, probably 1 minute a day, you will be a much better manager, and 5 minutes a day, you'll be probably as an effective a leader as people have ever had in their organization, and the kind of the best boss they've ever had. So I think it's kind of useful to really give this some context and really think about it. And the Kuznis and Posner book is quite good, I think, of making the case of informal recognition and rewards. And this notion of 1 minute a day, you can do this. 5 minutes a day, you can do this, I think is really good advice. So with that, that is week 4 of the class. And next week, we'll be moving into the social information processing model.